The betrayal did not arrive loudly or suddenly. It unfolded in silence, dressed in politeness, legal language, and carefully rehearsed confidence. Sitting inside the lawyer's office, surrounded by polished wood and expensive furniture, the truth became impossible to escape. What should have been a routine inheritance discussion turned into a public execution of loyalty, memory, and blood. A sister who once shared childhood laughter now spoke with cold certainty, declaring ownership over everything that had belonged to our parents. As if love, sacrifice, and years of quiet endurance could be erased with a signature. The words were sharp, deliberate, and meant to wound. They carried the weight of long-held resentment, finally given permission to surface. What hurt most was not the money or the land, but the ease with which family history was rewritten. I was reduced to a disappointment, an inconvenience, someone unworthy of legacy. The betrayal stung deeper because it was delivered not in anger, but in calm assurance, as though it had been planned for years. The presence of smug approval beside her only confirmed that this was never impulsive. It was coordinated. The ranch, the accounts, the narrative of my father's decline, all of it had been shaped to benefit one side while silencing the other. The darkest secret, however, was not immediately visible. It was hidden beneath smiles, medical explanations, and legal paperwork. The story presented was that of a father losing clarity, making poor decisions, and gradually fading away. It was a convenient explanation, one that discouraged questions and rewarded obedience. Anyone who doubted it was dismissed as emotional or bitter. Yet beneath that carefully crafted version of events lay something far more disturbing. Manipulation disguised as care, control masked as concern, and exploitation wrapped in the language of family duty. The truth revealed itself slowly, piece by piece, through fragments that never quite aligned with the official story. There were unexplained changes in documents, sudden transfers of authority, and trusted people quietly removed from the picture. Those who knew too much were pushed aside. Those who asked questions were painted as unstable. The betrayal was systemic, designed to isolate its target and exhaust anyone who might challenge it. It thrived on silence, counting on the belief that family would never cross certain lines. When evidence finally emerged, it did not feel like victory. It felt like grief taking a sharper form. The realization that love had been weaponized was devastating. The betrayal was not a single act, but a sustained campaign that unfolded while everyone pretended nothing was wrong. It required patience, deception, and a willingness to sacrifice another human being's dignity for personal gain. That was the darkest truth of all. This was not accidental cruelty, but intentional harm. As the layers were stripped away, the image of family fractured completely. What remained was not anger, but clarity, the understanding that betrayal hurts most when it comes from those who know exactly where to strike. The exposure of the secret did not restore what was lost, but it did return something equally important: truth. And truth, once revealed, cannot be forced back into hiding. In the end, the inheritance was never just about property or money. It was about control, erasure, and the audacity to believe that power grants moral immunity. The betrayal exposed more than financial fraud. It revealed how greed can hollow out relationships until only manipulation remains. What was taken could never be replaced, but what was uncovered ensured that the darkness could no longer pretend to be family. The note was never meant to be found easily, nor was it meant to bring comfort. It was a quiet act of resistance, pressed into a trembling hand by a father who knew his voice was being stolen from him long before his life ended. Written in unsteady handwriting on yellowed paper, it carried the weight of foresight and fear, the kind that comes from realizing the people closest to you no longer have your best interests at heart. It was not an explanation or an apology. It was a warning, carefully disguised as something small enough to be dismissed, yet powerful enough to dismantle everything that had been built on lies. The note did not name names or accuse directly. Instead, it pointed toward truth, trusting that the person who received it would understand what others could not. Coordinates, a rough sketch, and a brief message were all it offered. But those fragments spoke louder than any formal declaration. It was evidence designed to survive silence, hidden where greed would not bother to look. The father who wrote it understood that spoken words could be denied, rewritten, or twisted, but physical proof had a patience that people did not. It could wait. It could endure. This note represented more than a plan. It was a final act of love from someone who had been stripped of agency and dignity. Knowing his time was limited, he chose strategy over confrontation. He documented what was happening to him, even as his strength faded. Each detail recorded was a refusal to disappear quietly. Each instruction was a lifeline extended into the future, meant to be grasped when the truth was finally questioned. The note acknowledged a painful reality. Justice would not arrive while he was alive, but it could still come after his death. The evidence it led to was never meant to shock for spectacle. It existed to restore reality. Hidden beneath floorboards and forgotten structures were records, recordings, and documentation that told the story he was no longer allowed to tell. Together, they formed a voice that could not be silenced by medication, intimidation, or legal maneuvering. They revealed patterns of control and exploitation that had been dismissed as confusion or illness. The father had known that the narrative being built around him was false, and he refused to let it stand unchallenged. What made the note so powerful was its restraint. It did not demand revenge or assign punishment. It simply asked for truth to be uncovered and trusted the right person to act with integrity once it was found. That trust transformed grief into purpose. Following the instructions became more than a search for evidence. It became a continuation of a fight that had been waged in isolation. Every step taken toward uncovering the truth felt like walking alongside him again, guided by his resolve. The note's existence shattered the illusion that the past was settled. It proved that silence does not equal consent, and that patience can be a form of resistance. The evidence it revealed forced reality into the open, making denial impossible. What had been dismissed as weakness was exposed as courage. What had been labeled decline was revealed as endurance. In the end, the note accomplished exactly what it was meant to do. It ensured that the truth would outlive deception. It gave voice to a man who had been deliberately muted and reminded the world that justice does not always arrive on time, but it arrives nonetheless. Through that single fragile piece of paper, a father reclaimed his story, his dignity, and his legacy, proving that even in death, truth has a way of demanding to be heard. The moment the truth began to surface, escape became the only option. What started as a quiet drive through familiar roads turned into a desperate flight through the unforgiving Montana mountains, where every curve of asphalt and stretch of forest felt like a test of survival. The landscape, once a place of peace and childhood memory, transformed into something cold and predatory. Towering pines closed in on both sides of the highway, their shadows stretching across the road like silent witnesses to a chase that was no longer just about speed, but about silencing the truth before it could reach daylight. The pursuit carried a suffocating sense of inevitability. The mountains offered no comfort, only exposure. Long, winding passes left nowhere to hide, and the vastness of the terrain amplified the danger rather than diminishing it. Each glance into the rearview mirror brought a fresh surge of fear, the unmistakable presence of a vehicle moving with calculated aggression, pushing through traffic as though laws and lives were equally disposable. The realization that someone was willing to kill to keep the truth buried made every second stretch painfully long. The road itself became an enemy. Icy patches threatened to steal control with a single mistake, and narrow guardrails offered little protection from the ravines below. The car trembled under the strain of sudden acceleration and sharp turns, responding to desperation rather than precision. Inside, silence was broken only by the sound of breath drawn too fast and the hum of tires fighting for traction. The air felt heavy, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see who would emerge alive. Fear evolved into clarity as the chase intensified. This was no longer intimidation or warning. It was an attempt to erase a living problem. The knowledge sharpened focus, stripping away hesitation and replacing it with instinct. The truth was no longer an abstract concept or legal argument. It had become something physical, something that demanded protection at any cost. Every mile gained felt stolen, every narrow escape a temporary victory against a threat that refused to relent. The mountains blurred into a series of relentless obstacles. Passing lanes became battlegrounds, and sudden impacts turned the vehicle into a fragile shell, separating life from death. The roar of engines echoed off rock faces, creating a chaotic symphony of violence that felt wildly out of place in such ancient terrain. The wilderness did not intervene. It simply watched, indifferent to human greed and desperation. Survival depended entirely on resolve and the willingness to risk everything for one more chance to keep going. In that chaos, memory became a weapon. Knowledge of forgotten paths and abandoned routes surfaced from childhood, offering slim opportunities where logic failed. The mountains, once a backdrop to family stories, revealed hidden veins of escape to those who remembered them well enough. Darkness became an ally, and silence transformed from something threatening into something protective. The pursuit did not end in triumph, only in brief relief, bought through risk and instinct rather than safety. When the chase finally loosened its grip, the aftermath lingered. Shaking hands and shallow breaths bore witness to how close death had come. The mountains stood unchanged, their peaks indifferent to the human drama that had unfolded beneath them. Yet something fundamental had shifted. The truth had been tested by fear and nearly crushed under violence, but it had survived. That survival came at a cost, etched into memory alongside the image of headlights slicing through darkness with lethal intent. The pursuit through the Montana mountains was not just a fight against another vehicle or a dangerous road. It was a confrontation between truth and greed, between exposure and erasure. In choosing to keep going, to outrun fear and refuse silence, the chase became a defining moment. The mountains did not offer mercy, but they bore witness to a decision that could not be undone. The truth would not be surrendered, no matter the cost. The abandoned stable stood at the edge of the property like a forgotten witness, its sagging frame and weather-beaten boards quietly holding secrets no one wanted disturbed. Time had stripped it of purpose and dignity, leaving behind a structure most people avoided out of fear or disinterest. Yet that neglect was precisely what made it the perfect hiding place. While attention remained fixed on polished offices, legal documents, and public narratives, the truth waited patiently in rot and dust. Preserved by obscurity, the stable did not announce its importance. It simply endured. Stepping inside felt like crossing into another era. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying hay, and every footstep sent echoes through the hollow interior. Broken stalls leaned at awkward angles, and shafts of moonlight cut through gaps in the roof, illuminating floating, dust-like suspended memories. This was not a place associated with crime in the traditional sense. There were no locks, no alarms, no obvious signs of concealment. And yet, beneath the warped floorboards, lay evidence that spoke louder than any courtroom testimony ever could. The crime itself had been meticulously planned, executed not through sudden violence, but through patience and manipulation. It relied on trust, routine, and the assumption that no one would question authority, wrapped in familial concern. Financial records, medical notes, and recordings were all carefully removed from places where they might be discovered, and hidden where curiosity rarely ventured. The stable was chosen not because it was secure, but because it was invisible. No one searches for truth in ruins unless they are guided there. Unearthing the proof felt less like discovery and more like confirmation of something deeply unsettling. Each document pulled from the darkness carried the weight of intent. Transactions were not accidental. Medication logs were not misunderstandings. Conversations captured on grainy recordings revealed awareness, planning, and a chilling absence of remorse. This was not chaos or desperation. It was calculation. Every move had been designed to extract control while maintaining plausible deniability. The physical condition of the stable mirrored the moral decay behind the crime, just as the structure had been allowed to deteriorate while still standing. The wrongdoing had progressed quietly under the appearance of normalcy. Boards weakened slowly, Beams cracked over time. Nothing collapsed all at once. By the time the damage became visible, the harm was already severe. The environment itself seemed to absorb the weight of what had happened there, as if the walls remembered every secret they had been forced to hold. Finding the hidden safe beneath the floorboards brought an overwhelming sense of finality. Inside it was not only evidence, but intention. The contents had been placed there with the knowledge that they might never be recovered, yet with hope that they would be. It was a final safeguard against erasure, a refusal to let lies become permanent history. The careful organization of the materials left no doubt that the truth had been protected deliberately, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The proof revealed in that abandoned stable dismantled every false narrative that had been carefully constructed. It stripped away excuses and exposed the crime for what it truly was: a sustained abuse of power carried out under the cover of family and legality. There was no ambiguity left to debate. The record spoke with brutal clarity, making denial impossible and accountability inevitable. When the stable was finally left behind, it no longer felt abandoned. Its purpose had been fulfilled. What had once been a forgotten structure became the turning point where silence ended and truth reclaimed its voice. The crime had been calculated, but it had underestimated one thing: that even the most carefully hidden evidence has a way of surfacing, especially when it is buried beneath the weight of conscience and time. The fire did not begin as chaos. It began as a deliberate act, a final attempt to erase what could no longer be controlled. In the darkness of that night, flames were not just weapons of destruction, but symbols of desperation, unleashed by people who believed that burning the truth would make it disappear. The crackle of ignition cut through the stillness like a verdict being pronounced, transforming a place of refuge into a trap where survival and justice were forced into a brutal race against time. Heat spread with terrifying speed, devouring dry wood and old hay, as if the structure had been waiting for a single spark to collapse into ruin. Smoke filled the air, thick and suffocating, stealing breath and clarity in equal measure. Vision blurred, lungs burned, and every instinct screamed to flee. Yet escape was not simple. The fire was not the only threat. Beyond the flames waited violence, fueled by rage and greed, ready to finish what the fire might not. Justice stood fragile in that moment, balanced on the edge of being reduced to ash. Survival became an act of defiance. Every movement carried risk. Every second demanded choice. Fear pressed heavily against reason, threatening to paralyze thought. But instinct pushed back harder. The body reacted before the mind could fully process the danger, reaching for anything that could slow the inferno or create an opening. In that chaos, courage was not loud or heroic. It was raw, urgent, and fueled by the refusal to let everything end in smoke and silence. The flames illuminated the truth in ways words never could. Faces twisted by desperation revealed how far some were willing to go to protect lies. The fire stripped away pretense, exposing intent with brutal clarity. There was no room left for denial or negotiation. What remained was a stark choice between life and destruction, between protecting evidence and surrendering to fear. Justice, once confined to documents and recordings, now depended on human endurance. Time distorted under the pressure of heat and danger. Seconds stretched into agonizing eternities as the structure groaned and weakened. Burning beams creaked overhead, threatening to collapse and bury everything beneath them. The air itself felt hostile, pressing down with heat and smoke. Each breath became a conscious effort, each step a calculated gamble against falling debris and advancing flames. Survival was no longer guaranteed. It had to be earned. In that night, loyalty revealed its true meaning. Sacrifice was no longer an abstract idea, but a physical reality measured in pain and risk. The willingness to stand ground, to fight back, and to protect something greater than oneself transformed fear into purpose. Even as the fire raged, resolve burned hotter. Justice refused to vanish quietly. It demanded witnesses. It demanded endurance. When help finally arrived, it felt unreal, like waking from a nightmare, still clinging to the senses. Sirens cut through the roar of fire, and flashing lights fractured the darkness, signaling that the world beyond the flames still existed. The fire had not won. Though it consumed wood and memory, it failed to consume the truth. What remained stood scarred but intact, carried forward by those who refused to let it burn away. That night became a turning point, etched permanently into memory. Fire had been used to intimidate, to destroy, and to silence, but instead it illuminated guilt and exposed cruelty. Survival was not just physical escape. It was the preservation of truth against overwhelming force. Justice nearly burned away in the chaos, but it endured, carried out of the flames by sheer will, and the unyielding belief that some truths are worth risking everything to protect. The prison sentences marked an ending, but they did not bring closure in the way many expect. Justice delivered through steel bars and legal language can acknowledge wrongdoing, yet it does not erase the damage left behind. When the courtroom doors closed and the echoes of judgment faded, what remained was a quiet reckoning with grief, loss, and the hollow space where family trust once lived. Pain does not vanish when a verdict is read. It lingers, demanding to be understood and transformed. Or it hardens into something that consumes the survivor as completely as the crime itself. Turning away from that path required intention. The suffering endured could have easily become an identity, a permanent wound carried forward into every future decision. Instead, it became a question: what could be built from the ruins? The answer did not come from revenge or triumph, but from the recognition that the same cruelty experienced by one person was being repeated in countless households, hidden behind closed doors and respectable appearances. The pain was not unique, and that realization created responsibility rather than bitterness. Purpose began to take shape when the focus shifted outward. The knowledge gained through loss, manipulation, and survival carried value beyond personal healing. It became a tool that could be used to recognize patterns of abuse, financial exploitation, and emotional coercion that often go unnoticed until irreversible damage is done. What once felt like unbearable knowledge transformed into insight, and insight demanded action. Protecting others became a way to honor what had been lost without allowing the past to dictate the future. Creating something meaningful from suffering required patience and resolve. Every step forward carried reminders of what had happened, but those memories no longer served as anchors pulling backward. Instead, they functioned as guides, shaping decisions with clarity and compassion. Assistance offered to others was not abstract charity, but informed support rooted in experience. It spoke the language of those who had been dismissed, disbelieved, or silenced, offering not just resources but understanding. Purpose also redefined justice. Punishment alone could never address the deeper damage caused by exploitation and betrayal. True justice included prevention, education, and immediate support for those at risk. By redirecting resources toward protection and advocacy, pain was converted into a safeguard. What once caused harm now actively worked against it, creating barriers where vulnerability had once been exploited. This transformation did not erase the past, but it ensured the future would be different for someone else. Healing unfolded gradually through this process. Each person helped, each situation interrupted, softened the sharp edges of memory. The act of standing beside others in moments of fear and uncertainty restored a sense of agency that had once been stolen. Purpose did not replace grief, but it gave it direction. It allowed sorrow to coexist with meaning rather than dominating it. In the end, the prison sentences represented accountability, but purpose represented resolution. Turning pain into protection became an act of defiance against the idea that suffering must remain destructive. It proved that even the most devastating experiences can be reshaped into something that guards others from similar harm. Through this transformation, loss found its voice, justice found its extension, and pain found a future where it no longer existed without meaning.